When you decide to step away from a narcissist, the world around you may feel lighter, freer, and more authentic. But what happens in the mind of someone who has thrived on control, validation, and manipulation? Understanding this is not about revenge or curiosity. It's about reclaiming your own power and noticing the patterns that once held you captive. The first thing you'll notice is a deep confusion. The narrative they relied on, the story that positioned them at the center and you as the supporting character, is gone. Without someone to mirror their ego, their carefully constructed reality begins to crumble. Suddenly, the world doesn't revolve around them, and the certainty they once felt evaporates. A narcissist's world is a delicate illusion. Every thought, every word, every interaction has been meticulously crafted to maintain an image of control, superiority, and perfection. This reality isn't built on truth or mutual respect. It's built on manipulation, dependence, and the reflection of others. You were a crucial part of that structure. Your reactions, your compliance, your validation, they acted as bricks in the walls of their self-made kingdom. The moment you leave, that foundation begins to crumble. The narrative they relied on, the story that cast them as the hero, the victim, or the center of every situation, is shattered. Without your presence to affirm their constructed identity, their mind begins to spiral. They no longer have the constant reassurance that everything is under their control. Every certainty they took for granted becomes questionable. Every memory, every conversation, and every truth they held starts to feel unstable. This collapse is not instantaneous or dramatic. It's subtle, creeping in like shadows over a house of cards. They begin to doubt their judgment, question their assumptions, and second-guess their own sense of reality. Small cracks appear in their carefully painted facade, and those cracks quickly widen under the weight of your absence. The once solid world that seemed so permanent is now fragile and unstable, and for the first time, they must confront the frightening reality that they do not and perhaps cannot control everything. In essence, the collapse of their constructed reality is a reckoning. It's a silent acknowledgement that their power was never inherent. It was borrowed from your attention, your energy, and your presence. And when that supply is gone, the carefully orchestrated illusion unravels, leaving them exposed, unbalanced, and profoundly unsettled. Once you're gone, the narcissist's mind becomes a relentless loop of what-ifs and why-nots. They replay every interaction, every argument, every moment in painstaking detail, searching for answers, explanations, or mistakes they can fix. Their mind refuses to rest because it has been trained to control and manipulate every situation, and now the one situation they cannot control, your absence, torments them endlessly. They dissect conversations in their memory, examining your words, your tone, your expressions, and the smallest gestures, as if somewhere in that replay lies a secret key that could reverse reality. Every no you ever said, every boundary you ever set, every moment you stood firm becomes fuel for obsessive thought. They analyze it from every angle, creating elaborate mental narratives to rationalize your departure or to shift blame away from themselves. But the truth is, there is no definitive answer, and their mind cannot accept it. They crave certainty, but your absence has introduced chaos. Without your presence to mirror them, validate them, or comply with their expectations, they are left with a gnawing emptiness and confusion. Every scenario they imagine for reconciliation, manipulation, or control falls apart before it even begins. The harder they chase, the more they spiral, trapped in a cycle of their own making. This endless mental replay isn't productive, it's destructive, it eats all. Once you're gone, frustration becomes a permanent resident in the narcissist's mind. They are no longer in control, and control has always been their lifeline, the invisible thread that kept their world orderly, predictable, and safe. Now that thread is severed and every attempt to regain it feels futile. Small irritations become mountains, minor setbacks feel catastrophic, and the absence of your influence magnifies every perceived flaw in their environment. This frustration is not only about losing power, it's about losing certainty. They are used to bending situations, emotions, and people to fit their narrative. Without you, the world refuses to conform. Every unanticipated event, every interaction they cannot manipulate, every boundary they cannot cross becomes a source of irritation and mental unrest. They replay your absence, wishing they could rewrite history, and each imagined scenario that fails only deepens the gnawing frustration. The emotional energy that once flowed from their manipulation of you now turns inward, twisting into restlessness, resentment, and unease. They may attempt to distract themselves by criticizing others, seeking new validation, or creating drama, but these efforts are temporary and hollow. The frustration is like a low-burning fire that never extinguishes, constantly reminding them of their loss and their impotence. This constant agitation is exhausting, yet they cannot stop it. They are trapped in the discomfort of their own mind, unable to find peace, unable to admit vulnerability, and unable to reclaim the certainty they once took for granted. Their frustration becomes both a punishment and a mirror, reflecting the fragility of a life built entirely on external control and the absence of authentic self-awareness. In this way, frustration is more than an emotion. It is a symptom of their unraveling. While they wrestle with this relentless inner turmoil, you are free to breathe, to heal, and to move forward without the weight of their control. The contrast is striking. While they are imprisoned by obsession and unease, you live in liberation and clarity. A narcissist thrives on what psychologists call emotional supply, the steady flow of attention, admiration, and compliance from others. This supply is the air they breathe, the fuel that powers their identity and sustains their sense of importance. You were once a primary source of this supply, a constant mirror reflecting their desires and validating their self-worth. The moment you leave, that supply vanishes, leaving a vacuum that cannot be filled easily, if at all. Isolation sets in almost immediately, though it doesn't resemble the kind of solitude that fosters growth or introspection. Instead, it is a restless, anxious, and gnawing emptiness. They may attempt to fill it with distractions, relationships, or manipulations, but nothing can replace the unique validation that was once yours. Every call unanswered, every message ignored, every boundary enforced becomes a reminder of what they have permanently lost. The absence of emotional supply also exposes a deeper truth they have long avoided. Beneath their grandiose facade and confident exterior, there is a fragile, dependent self. Without constant affirmation, their identity begins to feel unstable. Every insecurity, every shadow of doubt, every hidden fear rises to the surface. Isolation magnifies these internal cracks, and they find themselves trapped in a silent struggle with a self they never truly knew or nurtured. Moreover, isolation creates desperation. They may reach out, attempt to provoke, or engineer scenarios to regain what was lost, but the more they fail, the deeper their sense of solitude becomes. This is not the quiet, reflective loneliness that encourages self-growth. It is a torment born from the sudden collapse of their control, a mental space where anxiety, regret, and obsession coexist. And yet, while they are confined within this prison of their own making, once you're gone, anger becomes one of the most visible and intense emotions a narcissist experiences. But it's important to understand that this anger is rarely about you directly. It's not fueled by genuine grievance or authentic hurt. Instead, it is a reflection of loss, the loss of control, certainty, and the constant validation they once took for granted. The world no longer bends to their desires, and in that resistance, they feel powerless, threatened, and deeply unsettled. Projection often accompanies this anger. Instead of confronting their own insecurities, failures, or vulnerability, they cast blame outward. You may find that they twist the narrative, suggesting that you were the problem all along, that you abandoned them, or that your choices were selfish. This is not an attempt at reconciliation. It is a defense mechanism, a way to avoid facing the uncomfortable truth that their power over you is gone. Their projections serve as both a shield and a distraction from the gnawing emptiness inside. The anger itself is relentless and consuming. They may lash out in subtle ways through criticism, gossip, manipulation of mutual acquaintances, or even social media displays designed to provoke or unsettle. Every act is an attempt to reclaim what they have lost, but it only deepens the emotional dissonance within. Behind the aggression, there is frustration, confusion, and a quiet despair. They recognize, often unconsciously, that nothing they do can bring back what was taken from their control. This phase is also emotionally exhausting for them. Anger and projection require energy, but unlike the days when they had you to manipulate, now that energy is spent in vain. They are trapped in a loop of rage and defensiveness, bouncing between imagined grievances and the harsh reality of their absence. They feel powerful only in fantasy. In reality, they are disarmed, poached, worthless, and increasingly desperate. For you, witnessing this unraveling can be sobering, but it is also empowering. Their anger and projection are not reflections of your failure, but mirrors of their fragility. While they are consumed by attempts to distort reality, you are free to exist authentically, to set boundaries, and to live without the weight of their emotional turbulence. Ultimately, anger and projection are symptoms of a mind struggling to adapt to the absence of control. They cannot manipulate your presence, they cannot rewrite the past, and they cannot feed the ego that once thrived on your attention. In their fury and misdirection, they reveal the stark contrast between their dependence and your liberation. A narcissist's identity is often like a house of mirrors, carefully constructed, reflective, and dependent on the gaze of others. They have spent years building a persona that hides vulnerability, masks insecurity, and projects strength. This self is not rooted in authenticity. It is built on admiration, compliance, and the attention of those around them. You are a central part of this structure, consistently reflecting back what they needed to see in themselves. The moment you leave, that reflection disappears, and the cracks begin to show. Without your presence, the carefully curated identity they relied on starts to unravel. Every compliment, every act of obedience, every interaction that once validated their ego is gone. In its place, uncertainty creeps in. They begin to confront parts of themselves they have long ignored. Their insecurities, their shame, and their unresolved emotions. These are feelings they rarely allowed themselves to acknowledge because doing so would expose weakness. Now, exposure is inevitable. This erosion is subtle but relentless. They may feel hollow, disoriented, or disconnected from who they thought they were. Every decision they make feels heavier, every social interaction feels riskier, and the sense of omnipotence they once carried so effortlessly begins to fade. They may try to rebuild themselves by C. Once you're gone, the narcissist's mind becomes a relentless battlefield. For years, they have relied on you and others as a source of energy, an emotional supply that fueled their sense of power, control, and self-importance. Every interaction was calculated, every conversation a means to maintain dominance or affirmation. Without that supply, the energy that once came effortlessly now disappears, leaving them to generate it from within, a skill they rarely possess. This absence triggers profound mental exhaustion. Their mind races constantly, cycling through strategies, what-ifs, and imagined scenarios. They replay past interactions, analyze every detail, and obsess over ways to regain lost control, but each effort only emphasizes the futility of their situation. Unlike you, who can step back, breathe, and heal, their cognitive and emotional resources are stretched thin, depleted by anxiety, frustration, and relentless mental rumination. The exhaustion is not just about mental effort, it's about emotional labor that goes nowhere. They attempt to manage feelings they cannot fully understand, control circumstances they cannot change, and manipulate outcomes that are permanently out of reach. Each thought, each plan, each projection is an effort to restore the world they once dominated, and yet each attempt ends in failure. The more they try, the more drained they become, trapped in a cycle of endless, unproductive energy expenditure. This mental fatigue also amplifies their internal instability. Decisions feel heavier, reactions become sharper, and emotional regulation grows increasingly difficult. Without the steady stream of external validation that once compensated for inner emptiness, even small triggers can provoke disproportionate anxiety, irritability, or anger. Their mind, once seemingly confident and unshakable, now teeters on the edge of exhaustion and disorientation. Meanwhile, this exhaustion becomes invisible to those who once surrounded them. They may appear composed, even charming on the surface, but internally their cognitive and emotional systems are taxed beyond repair. Every failed attempt to regain what they lost deepens their fatigue, reinforcing the spiral of frustration, anger, and despair. In contrast, your absence highlights the liberation you now enjoy. While they are trapped in the exhausting loop of thought and control, you are free to live authentically, to nurture your energy, and to experience peace without manipulation or obligation. Their mental exhaustion is a mirror of their dependence on others for survival, a stark reminder of what happens when a life is built on control